Hey everybody, today I'm going to be showing you guys how to draw mushrooms, specifically these trippy mushrooms. So I always just start out by drawing the cap, and then I draw the gills under it, and then I draw the stem, and then I erase where the gills and the stem overlap, and then I put the dots on. So it's really just like 4 or 5 different steps. Yeah, so it's really easy, really fun. And I'm not gonna explain exactly like how I'm drawing this because I mean you can see it. You can see the lines I'm making and everything. So some drawing tips are to like draw like really sketchy lines. Like they don't have to be perfect or anything, because when you're just drawing it, you can kind of change how you want it to look as much as you want, because then when you get to painting it or coloring it, you can draw over or under those lines as much as you want. You know, drawing like with a looser hand and drawing like a sketchier design usually looks better anyways. And then of course you'd go over it with like a more finished line at some point. Another thing is don't be afraid to erase. You know, you're gonna need to erase a lot, and that is totally okay. We all like make little mistakes when drawing and everything. Even if you draw a whole entire thing and you're like, you know what, I don't like this, it's totally fine to erase, because sometimes you just need to like draw something the wrong way, the way you don't like it, so then you can better understand how you do like it. And then my next thing is like also draw lightly, so that when you erase there won't be pencil dents in the paper. And as you can see, I drew all of these mushrooms quite differently. None of them really look the same. They look similar, but they don't all look the same. So that's the really nice thing about drawing mushrooms, especially trippy mushrooms, is that they can all look completely different, and that's a-okay, because mushrooms in real life don't look the same usually. I mean, if they're like the same like breed or whatever, the same species, whatever mushroom categories are called, they're gonna probably look similar, but you know, you can just kind of do whatever and it's fine, because as long as you can tell it's a mushroom, that's really all that matters, as well as they are trippy mushrooms. So if they look kind of wonky, that is better. That's why they're one of my favorite things to draw, is because you can give them weird lines, weird shapes. You could put an eyeball between the gills and the like cap of the mushroom, and it would look so cute. Like you can do so many different things. So the next thing I'm gonna get to is painting. So my first thing is use a tiny brush for details, or like the small things or the outlines if you're going to outline stuff in black or whatever. Usually I use a pen because I think it's easier to control, but if you just want to use black paint for like a richer look, that works really well as well. If you paint and then after it dries it looks really streaky, you can just go over with another layer of paint. Pretty much any paint is gonna do this that's like one of the like cheaper non-professional paints. So don't worry if you do have to go over the same part 2 or 3 different times. Sometimes you can do a thick enough coat the first time and it'll be okay, but sometimes you're gonna have to go back and give it a second coat. That's something I notice when people paint stuff. They just do one coat and they're like, why is this so bad? Like, it's not even. But if you just go over it one more time, then it'll completely even everything out and it'll look super nice. Another thing that I don't know if you're gonna see me actually do in this video is to push on the back of a paintbrush. Is what I always do is, so like I'll hold the paintbrush in my right hand and then I like lean my other hand on the back of the paintbrush, because it just makes it steadier. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you have really shaky hands, I recommend that, because I personally have super shaky hands. I can never make straight lines, but that's just what I do to keep everything where it should be. I know for a fact there's a clip of me doing that somewhere in here because I kept that for that, but it's later in the video, so you'll see that. So my next tip is if you're doing something that has a lot of different colors, like here I'm doing different colors for all the mushrooms, put little dots of color at the beginning to basically just map out where you want your colors so that you know that you're not going to use the same color too many times, or to figure out what colors look good together, figure out what other colors you need to use. And you could see a clip in there at some point of my hand covered in paint, and it's because I use the back of my paintbrush to dip into the paint, and then I would put the dot on the paper, and then I'd just wipe it off on my hand so I could use the same paintbrush handle over and over again. And yeah, it just kind of got all over the place. But yeah, that's a pretty good tip. If you're making some sort of pattern or making a bunch of different things, just map out your colors before you even start painting, because it takes a lot of the stress away from figuring out your colors, I guess. Another thing is, when you're painting, turn your paper so that it's facing you. I don't even know how to describe it, but from these clips you can see that I turn my paper around a lot, and it's just because it's easier. So figure out the most comfortable way for you to paint, for you to be able to see it, you know, wherever your hand-eye coordination is at its strongest. Turn your paper so that you aren't painting in a weird way. It's similar to, you know, how teachers are like, turn your paper when you cut rather than turning your hand. It's like that, and I honestly don't know how to describe it, but I think it's something that comes naturally to you when you start doing art and you're like, okay, if I turn my paper or canvas this certain way, it'll be easier for me to color this or whatever. It's just easier to see, and it makes it easier. So yeah, turn your paper around and stuff so that you can see what you're painting, so that you're never painting blindly and just hoping that you stay in the lines. Make sure you can always see your lines, that like your hand isn't blocking them, or even the tip of the paintbrush isn't blocking them. Now on to outlining. I always outline everything because it just makes everything look so crisp and nice and neat. My next thing is similar to the painting thing, is to turn your paper so that you can see where you're drawing, because that helps a lot. And always make sure your hand is close to where you're drawing. Another thing is if you're using a marker or something that has like a flat tip, hold your pen up and down because that helps keep the ink flowing, I guess. If you see what I do, like I repeatedly draw on my other paper, it's because I feel like the tip just gets like gunked up with the paint. So I just draw on the other paper to get the ink flowing again. So that's another tip. And my biggest thing, which goes for any part of art, but especially outlining, is to go slow and just take your time and don't try to rush it because otherwise you might mess up. And that's a pretty hard mess up to fix sometimes. So yeah, just go slow and take your time. And as you can see, I'm outlining the outside even though I'm going to be painting the background black. So the reason I'm doing that is because then I don't have to get so close to the mushrooms when I'm painting in black, just because it's harder to control paint than it is to control pen. And now on to painting a background. So the first thing I'm doing is going around each of the mushrooms with this really tiny paintbrush. And what I like to do is load a whole bunch of paint on there, because then you don't have to go over it again. And it kind of sucks painting right up against stuff because you're just constantly worried you're accidentally gonna ruin it. So if you use enough paint at once, then your layer will be thick enough that you won't have to do another layer of paint so close to the mushrooms. But also you would just at least want to have like that nice outline there, because it just makes it easier to fill in the rest of the painting. So, you know, once you have a majority of your stuff outlined, so then when you go to paint the background, you can just paint the background and not have to worry about getting too close to the mushrooms. And honestly, that's a major time saver, because you can just go and paint all of your, paint the outlines of all of your things that are on your paper or canvas. And then after that's all done, then you can go and paint the background without having to stop and do the little details. Although you can do whatever you want, really. That's just my tip for this, I guess. That's just what I do personally, and that's what I really like to do. Another major thing is to always watch your hand when you're doing this, and be very cautious of where your hand is at and where the wet paint is, so that you don't dip your hand in the paint. So far I haven't smudged anything on my papers, but I always just put like the paint on the side of that cardboard there, and I dip my hand in that constantly. So one of my biggest tips for painting and stuff, if you're going to be painting small things or things with small details, is to get a tiny brush. Honestly, the brushes I use, I feel like are even a little bit too big. I want to get some smaller ones, but get some good tiny brushes if you're going to be doing a lot of small things and small details and stuff. If you never plan on doing that, then obviously you don't need super tiny brushes. But if you're going to be doing stuff like this, I 100% recommend getting a tiny brush. right here you can see what I was talking about earlier about how I hold on to the back of the paintbrush. I just like hold it down just because it helps keep it steady. So if you have a really shaky hand and you have a hard time being steady and going around stuff and getting in those small details, I highly recommend doing that.